Well, welcome and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC as we call it for short. As you know, the NEMA Public Information Subcommittee identified EMAC as a topic that PIOs needed more information about. I thank you to the subcommittee for allowing us to provide this webinar to you today and to provide that information to you on EMAC. My name is Angela Koppel. I'm the NEMA EMAC coordinator, and we're joined today by another EMAC staff member, Jennifer Perkins. Jennifer and I will be answering questions throughout the webinar through the questions panel and working on any technical issues that arise during the webinar. It is my pleasure to introduce Jack Jowett. At the end of September, Jack retired as the chief of the logistics branch at the New York State Emergency Management Office in Albany, New York. Jack now works at NEMA as an EMAC advisor. Jack was the chair of the EMAC Executive Task Force in 2004 to 2005 and has been engaged on the EMAC Executive Task Force as an EMAC past chair and a member at large until his retirement. And Jack, I'll turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you, Angela. I'm glad to be with the Emergency Management Homeland Security PIO community this morning to transfer knowledge on the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. I'm going to cover a lot in the next hour and may lightly cover some areas. I remind you that a more detailed PDF version of the webinar will be emailed to you for future reference. In addition, you are encouraged to contact your state emergency management agency's EMAC coordinator for more information on EMAC procedures in your state. Now let's look at the objectives for this seminar. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will be background and history of the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. You will grasp the key provisions of the Compact. You will be acquainted with the Compact's governance and administrative structures. You will know the 5 phases of EMAC operations, and you will understand the responsibilities and expectations of individuals deployed under the Compact. Let's begin by taking a look at what EMAC is. EMAC is a nationally adopted mutual aid compact between member states that establishes a system to share resources and capabilities across state lines during an emergency or disaster. EMAC is often called the Governor's Compact since it was established by and for governors to deploy resources of their states to a state or two states in need of assistance without impediment. To fully understand the history of EMAC, we need to go back to 1992 and take a look at the Florida experience with the response to Hurricane Andrew. When then Governor Lawton Chiles reached out to neighboring states for much-needed assistance, he discovered that legal and other impediments precluded a rapid response by those states to provide assistance that was requested. Recognizing the need for a state-to-state mutual aid system, Governor Chiles, in cooperation with the Southern Governors Association, spearheaded efforts to put such a system in place. This effort culminated in 1993 with the adoption and ratification by the 17 Southern Governors Association states of the Southern Regional Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or SREMAC. In 1995, the Southern Governors voted to open membership in the SREMAC to all states that had an interest in joining their compact. The broadened agreement was renamed the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. Due to the interstate commerce nature of the compact, it required ratification by the Congress. In 1996, the compact was ratified and became Public Law 104-321. EMAC is the first national disaster compact to be ratified by the Congress since the Civil Defense Compact authorized in 1951. Keeping with the state-to-state directive of the compact, EMAC in the early days was used exclusively to deploy state personnel, equipment, and National Guard forces and capabilities. This changed in 2004 when it was recognized after 4 back-to-back hurricanes in Florida that the states needed to have a system to deploy local first response resources. A year later, in 2005, the states would send through the compact over 66,000 state and local personnel to the Gulf Coast region to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Growing from a membership of 17 in 1995, today all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the District of Columbia, are members of the compact. EMAC can be used to share any resource with another member state as long as the governor of the impacted state has declared an emergency under his or her state's law. The declaration of an emergency is a trigger that signifies the event is significant and warrants interstate mutual aid. The vision of the compact is that it should be the cornerstone of mutual aid, meaning that EMAC is institutionalized and automatic within the emergency management community across all disciplines, and that it will continue to serve as an effective means of deploying critical services and resources to support response and recovery activities. The EMAC mission, simply stated, is to facilitate the efficient and effective sharing of resources between member states during times of disaster or emergency. Now let's take a look at the Compact's legal provisions. The legal provisions address those matters that have in the past been impediments to interstate mutual aid. Public Law 104-321 is comprised of 13 articles of agreement. These articles span a variety of concerns, from the purpose of the compact to member state responsibilities, liability, and reimbursement. In order to enact the provisions of the compact, each member state has enacted the articles and state exactly as written in the compact. Some of the key articles are as follows. Article 4 addresses limitations, general concerns of the governors relative to entering into the compact. It establishes the broad rules of engagement. Key provisions of Article 4 provide assisting forces will be afforded the same powers, except arrest, as forces in the state they are assisting. Assisting forces will also remain under the command and control of their home authority. However, assisting forces will be under the operational control of the state receiving their assistance during the deployment. Article 5 addresses licenses and permits. In order to remove the impediments associated with professional license and other professional certifications, the article affords that any person holding a valid license, certificate, or other permit shall be deemed licensed, certified, or permitted to practice by the state requesting assistance. In practice, it has been found that there are challenges in implementing this provision. Through the EMAC advisory group, the professions have been approached and asked to both consider and resolve these challenges. Article 6 addresses liability concerns. Under the compact, liability is the responsibility of the requesting state. Thus, resource providers of an assisting state rendering aid are considered agents of the requesting state for tort liability and immunity purposes. Article 6 does not apply, however, to personnel that are not state employees or that are not made through legal means temporary agents of the state from which they are being deployed. None of the protections and provisions of the compact apply to any resource provider deploying outside the established EMAC operational procedures. Article 8 addresses compensation issues. Due to variances between states and workers' compensation and death benefits, each member state is responsible for payment of compensation and death benefits for personnel it deploys to assist another member state. Because a requesting state has no responsibility for workers' compensation, any costs incurred would not be eligible for reimbursement. This article also provides that the assisting state shall be reimbursed by the requesting state for any loss incurred while providing assistance, with the exception of workers' compensation benefits, which, as discussed previously, are the responsibility of the assisting state. Now let's take a look at the governance structure. The EMAC governance structure provides for the administrative oversight, fiscal management, and day-to-day support of the compact. At the top is the National Emergency Management Association, or NEMA. NEMA is the State Emergency Management Directors Professional Association. Among NEMA's standing committees is the EMAC Committee. The EMAC Committee is the managing body of the compact. The EMAC Committee approves policies and maintains oversight of EMAC. Administrative services for the compact are provided by NEMA, which has a full-time dedicated staff to support EMAC affairs. The EMAC Advisory Group is composed of individuals from national groups and associations representing the first responder community and other mutual aid stakeholders. The advisory group's purpose is to facilitate the integration of multidisciplinary assets into a national mutual aid response system through EMAC. NEMA's EMAC committee has delegated the responsibility for conducting business and emergency operations to the EMAC Executive Task Force. The EMAC Executive Task Force, or ETF, is comprised of staff members of the states and at-large members appointed by the chair. The ETF works with NEMA administrative staff to accomplish work elements of the EMAC strategic plan. When the compact becomes operational, the chair of the ETF becomes the leader of the National Coordination Group, which is the primary operational arm for the compact. Now we'll take a look at the 5 distinct phases of the EMAC process. They are pre-event preparation, activation, requesting and offering assistance, mobilization, response, and demobilization, and reimbursement. Each of these phases has specific steps to effectively and efficiently implement as both a requesting state and an assisting state. The first phase is pre-event preparation. This consists of planning and preparedness activities and includes such actions as developing activation and response procedures, developing capabilities, conducting training and exercises, and maintaining equipment. Specific planning activities include typing and credentialing resources based on standards established under the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, establishing mission-ready packages of typed resources with estimated costs, and building capacity to deploy and operate efficiently once deployed. Mission-ready packages are specific response and recovery resource capabilities that are organized, developed, trained, and exercised prior to the occurrence of a disaster or emergency. Mission-ready packages ensure the rapid identification, availability, ordering, and deployment of resources when requested. They are based on and are the next logical step after resource typing. All disciplines are encouraged to type their resources and prepackaged capabilities in coordination and cooperation with the State Emergency Management Agency. Mission-ready packages are based on NIMS resource typing definitions, which state resource typing is categorizing by capability the resources requested, deployed, and used in an incident. Measurable standards identifying resource capabilities and performance levels serve as the basis for categories. Resource users at all levels use those standards to identify and inventory resources. A template and more information on NIMS resource typing can be found on the Federal Emergency Management Agency's NIMS Resource Center website. A mission-ready packaging template can be found on the EMAC website at www.emacweb.org. Simply go to the Mutual Aid Resource drop-down box and select the Mission-Ready Packages link, as illustrated here. There are currently 144 mission-ready package models to assist resource providers in building resource capabilities. The models provide fields for capturing the key components relating to mission-ready package performance. They are NIMS typed resource data, if the resource is typed, a pre-scripted mission statement, limitations associated with the resource, logistical support required, the footprint needed, the time to deploy, and estimated cost. The mission-ready package mirrors how resources are requested. This slide is a capture of a mission-ready package template available on the EMAC website. You will note that the cost estimates are integrated into the spreadsheet workbook. The models also incorporate existing typed resources that are resident on the FEMA NIMS Resource Center website. Phase 2 of the EMAC process is the activation phase. Once the governor of an impacted state declares an emergency in accordance with state law, assistance under the EMAC operational system is triggered and the path is cleared for the receipt of mutual aid assistance from other EMAC member states. Also during the activation phase, the impacted state opens the event on the EMAC online operations system. The operations system provides for the tracking and monitoring of the event and the status of resource requests and assigned missions. Other actions during this phase include the identification of resources and capabilities needed and or available, and the activation of the operational components of the EMAC system. Phase 3 is the request and offer phase. During this phase, the affected or requesting state identifies its resource requirements and requests them from other member states. The next series of slides illustrate the typical approach taken to request assistance under the compact. An impacted state, in this case Kentucky, will typically reach out first to adjacent states for aid. This is more timely and is usually less costly. As an event escalates, or as the resources of adjacent states are exhausted, the impacted state will reach out to states in adjacent FEMA regions. In this example, Kentucky may seek assistance from states in FEMA regions 3, 4, 5, and 7. In a catastrophic event, the impacted state may seek assistance from all member states. Once a state has responded with an offer of assistance to the requesting state's Emergency Management Office formally details the mission assignment, the resources and capabilities needed, and other pertinent details on Section 1 of an EMAC Request for Assistance form, or Rec A. The Rec A is then transmitted to the assisting state Emergency Management Office. The assisting state determines resource availability and provides details on what is available and the associated costs. These are entered into Section 2 of the Rec A. The completed Section 2 is then returned to the requesting state. The requesting state reviews the offer and makes a decision on whether to accept it. Once accepted, the requesting state's authorized representative signs Part 3 of the Rec A and returns it to the state that is offering the assistance. Upon receipt, the assisting state's authorized representative signs Section 3 of the Rec A. At this point, the Rec A is a fully executed contract, and all of the provisions and protections of the compact are in effect for the mission. At this point, the assisting state notifies the resource provider, maybe a state agency, local government, or other entity, that the offer has been accepted and provides the resource provider with a mission order. The resource provider then prepares for deployment. Mobilization, response, and demobilization phase. During this phase, the resource is mobilized from their home state to the requesting state, perform the mission, and upon mission completion, demobilize and return home. Resource providers may deploy only after the deployment is approved by the state's EMAC authorized representative, and the resource provider is given a copy of the mission order for the deployment. The mission order is typically provided at a pre-deployment briefing. Any resource provider being deployed must follow agency-specific policies as well as procedures provided by the state emergency management agency. In addition, the resource provider should take necessary steps to verify the mission assignment, confirm point of contact information, confirm staging and/or duty station locations, and confirm that the requesting state has adequate space, equipment, and other logistical support necessary to perform the mission. Actions of a more personal nature include attending to personal business, establishing a mobilization timeline and departure agenda, verifying travel arrangements, gathering personal items, needed supplies, and essential equipment, the tracking and documentation of mission-related costs. Resource providers should attend a pre-deployment briefing if one is offered by the State Emergency Management Agency. At the pre-deployment briefing, the resource provider will receive the mission order and an explanation of other mission details and equipment needed, and they will be briefed on logistical requirements associated with the mission. The pre-deployment briefing will also cover such topics as health and security, financial issues, record keeping, and reimbursement. Once the resource provider arrives in the requesting state, the following actions are taken. The resource provider reports to the assigned duty station, notifies the requesting state, the assisting state, and family of arrival, notifies the assignment and obtains a status briefing, and must maintain regular contact with all parties. In accordance with Article 4 of the Compact, deployed personnel are under the operational control of the requesting state's assigned agency. However, they remain under the command and control of their own authority. They take mission assignments through the requesting state's incident command structure and are available for recall at any time. Although living conditions are usually noted in the Rec A, assignments can change. Resource providers should be prepared to encounter and deal with changing conditions, including the following: limited communications, self-sustaining or primitive conditions, traumatized residents and co-workers, long working hours, limited sleeping accommodations, unfamiliar weather, and difficulties obtaining cash. Once the mission is over, resources are no longer needed. Demobilization occurs. Demobilization actions include verifying completion of the mission with the requesting state, coordinating a demobilization plan, inventorying and checking equipment, documenting expenses, and verifying arrangements for the return home. Once the resource provider has returned home, the following actions are taken. Notification of the assisting state emergency management agency is made to inform them of the safe arrival, preparation and submission of the claim for reimbursement, and participation in post-deployment briefings. The final phase of the EMAC process is the reimbursement phase. The importance of this phase cannot be overstated. Since EMAC deployments fall into the first instance category, that is, the resource provider pays first and seeks reimbursement of eligible expenses upon completion, reimbursement can be contentious. All costs incurred in direct support of the mission and estimated and documented in the mission order or the Rec A are eligible for reimbursement. Expenses or obligations not noted in the Rec A cost estimate will require pre-approval and/or amendment of the Rec A. This slide covers basic principles of reimbursement. If possible, assisting states should pay a resource provider before submitting a claim for reimbursement to the requesting state. The requesting state agrees to reimburse the assisting state for all eligible mission-related costs as long as the expenses are substantiated. The reimbursement process varies from state to state, and claims must be well documented and follow EMAC and other applicable procedures. Deployed resource providers have the following responsibilities for reimbursement. They must understand home state travel policies, communicate with the assisting state, and keep copies of all documentation sent to the assisting state during the deployment. At the conclusion of the deployment, the resource provider must fully audit the claim for reimbursement before submitting it to the assisting state for payment. Eligible expenses fall into the following categories: personnel, travel, equipment, commodities, and other. Let's look at each category in a little more detail. Personnel costs include regular time, overtime, and fringe benefits. Salaries are calculated at the regular rate used by the resource provider. All timesheets and other payroll records must be signed by an authorized official. Travel costs include airfare, ground transportation, lodging, and meals. Documentation for airfare includes receipt and boarding passes. Examples of documentation for ground transportation include taxi receipts, mileage records for personally owned vehicles, fuel receipts for government-owned vehicles, and rental agreements and fuel receipts for rental cars. Lodging expenses are based on the allowable per diem rate for the state and area in which the resource provider is assigned, or the actual cost of lodging. Lodging costs are pre-identified and agreed to in the Rec A. Expenses for meals are similarly handled. If not provided by the requesting state, the resource provider will receive either the per diem meal rate for the state and area in which the mission is being performed, or actual cost based on documentation provided. Reimbursable expenses for equipment include operating and maintenance costs of vehicles and machinery, and equipment damage. Examples of equipment records include log sheets, which capture the hours the equipment was in use, and records on fuel and oil consumption. Damage to equipment should be documented with photographs and will require that insurance documents be produced. Commodities include consumables, supplies, and materials that are necessary either to support the deployment or that are required in order to perform the assigned mission. All receipts must be produced for commodities. Additional justification may be required when claiming reimbursement in this category. Examples of other costs that may be eligible include repair and/or replacement of equipment, costs for decontamination or cleaning of equipment during the deployment, costs associated with the purchase and transport of supplies, costs incurred in returning equipment to pre-disaster condition, and replacement costs of other items damaged or destroyed. Ineligible costs are usually obvious and generally do not pass a reasonableness test. Typical expenses that are not considered eligible include the replacement of items prior to the deployment date and items purchased outside the authorized deployment period. Expenses incurred for personal use items, such as alcohol, tobacco, and toiletries. Expenses incurred for personal use items, and expenses not supported by receipts or other documentation, and costs associated with the backfill of personnel. Some important things to keep in mind relative to reimbursement include the following. If the Rec A or mission order does not include or mention a certain expense, it may not be reimbursed. If any aspect of a mission changes to the extent that expenses are significantly increased, an amendment to the Rec A may be required. And the auditor's mantra, there is no such thing as too much documentation. This section goes into the reimbursement package. This slide illustrates the route a reimbursement claim takes before it is paid. From left to right, the process is as follows. Deployed personnel submit expenses to the resource provider, which in turn reimburses the personnel in accordance with normal day-to-day procedures. The resource provider then prepares a reimbursement package in accordance with EMAC and assisting state instructions and submits the package to the assisting state. The assisting state audits the reimbursement claim and pays the resource provider for eligible expenses. Once all resource provider claims have been received, the assisting state prepares its reimbursement package and submits it to the requesting state. If the reimbursement package meets all requesting state audit requirements, the claim will be processed and the assisting state will be reimbursed. To facilitate the reimbursement process for resource providers, standard forms have been developed. These forms and other instructions will be provided to resource providers by the assisting state emergency management agency. This slide illustrates the primary form used by a resource provider to summarize a claim for reimbursement. The Intrastate Reimbursement Form, or R2, contains mission specifics, a summary of expenses, and requires the signature of an authorized official of the resource provider or jurisdiction. The R2 reimbursement form is supplemented by all documentation that supports the expenses incurred in connection with the deployment. A lot of questions arise with respect to EMAC and FEMA reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program. I will address this briefly. EMAC was conceived outside of and has no direct relationship to the FEMA Public Assistance Program. The decision on whether to seek reimbursement for expenses incurred for interstate mutual aid under the compact is strictly between the impacted state and FEMA. If a federal disaster is declared, a requesting state may submit project worksheets to reclaim eligible EMAC expenses as specified in FEMA Disaster Assistance Policy 9523.6. Regardless of eligibility for the FEMA Public Assistance Program, the requesting state is obligated under the compact to reimburse an assisting state for 100% of eligible expenses incurred and documented by the assisting state resource providers. This concludes my presentation this morning. We've covered a lot of material in a very short time. I thank you for your participation and hope you gained some useful knowledge on EMAC, how it works, and what to expect if you are deployed. At this point, I'll turn the webinar back over to Angela Koppel, and we'll field any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you for that excellent overview, Jack. We have a couple of questions. The first one is, do you know of any events in your experience where PIOs have been requested as part of an EMAC deployment?
It's very common that public information officers are requested. In my experience, I know that a lot of public information officers were deployed to assist in the Gulf Coast for Hurricane Katrina. And as more experience is gained in deploying and utilizing public information officers from other states, I think you'll see more and more requests coming out for them.
A follow-on question to that would be, several PIOs have mentioned that they need help during a disaster, but their director doesn't want to ask for help. How can you overcome that barrier?
Each state is sovereign and makes its own decisions. EMAC does not typically get involved in those types of decision-making areas. However, it's basically a matter of education. Education and training usually overcome fears of asking for outside assistance. It's usually people are uncomfortable, not in connection with PIOs, but other resources. Going back in EMAC's history, very rarely in the early days was the compact used at all for anything. Since the 4 hurricanes in Florida, and especially post-Katrina, the use of the compact has grown by leaps and bounds. So it's a matter of education. I think, a discussion on the PIO aspect of deployments with the director would probably help out there.
Could you please explain the difference between operational control and command and control?
This is an area that is always difficult for people to grasp because the terms are used differently by different people. But basically, operational control means, in terms of EMAC deployment, when a resource deploys, operational control of the state, meaning they perform the mission that state assigns to them, and they perform it in the location where it needs to be performed. I'll use an example of a debris clearance team, say. They're requested by a state to go and clear debris at County X on these roads. That's the operational direction and control. While they're performing the mission, they'll have a team leader who will control the on-scene aspect of the deployment. That's the command and control. So they report to a boss in the field. They respond to that boss's directions on how to perform the details of the mission. I hope that makes it clear.
Next question, would a PIO be better served by attaching themselves to an incident management team? In other words, do IMTs get deployment time more than frequently than individual PIOs?
The purpose of an incident management team is to support either a state or a local government that is devastated and needs advice and recommendations on how to reestablish its ability to operate. In that particular case, I'm not sure that a public information officer would have a purpose unless the state or the jurisdiction that the incident management team is supporting needed that capability. What was the second half of the question?
Do IMTs get deployment time more frequently than individual PIOs?
Incident management teams are typically deployed in major incidents where there's true devastation and communities have to be rebuilt. That's the reason they may seem to be deployed more often. But again, PIOs is something I think that, as an organization, your committee or whatever should consider that question and educate your directors on the usefulness of a PIO. And if you prepare your resources so that it's known what state will receive if they request it, in other words, it's typed, you've got mission-ready packaging for it, and you make it known that it's available, I think when it's needed it will be requested.
Within a state emergency management office, who does a PIO go to request public information assistance through EMAC?
If your state is affected by a disaster and you need PIO assistance, you would go to the operations folks typically and make your need known. They have among options to look in-state, other agencies to help, county PIOs perhaps, but they also know the operations folks or logistics perhaps that EMAC is an option. Those issues should be discussed with the EMAC folks in your state emergency management agency or office today. Don't wait till you have an event occur to find out what that process is and who you need to talk to.
Is there a limit on the number of PIOs you can request through EMAC, and do these incident management teams have to deploy through EMAC?
There's no limit on what can be requested. There may be a limit on what you will receive. What I didn't cover anywhere in this webinar this morning was the fact that there's no guarantee that anyone's going to respond to a request for assistance. States want to help one another, and it has been shown that they do. However, again, there's no guarantee. That being said, the only limit on PIO's availability is what the states can and are willing to provide at any given time in any situation. With regard to the IMT, you'll have to remind me what that last part of the question was.
Do the incident management teams have to deploy under EMAC?
Has to deploy under EMAC. EMAC is one method to deploy an incident management team. There could be separate side agreements between states to deploy them as well. Most states, however, when looking at their options, would likely choose EMAC because of the protections it affords, the guarantee for reimbursement, the immunity, tort liability, and the other aspects I covered this morning oftentimes don't get the same treatment in other types of agreements. So this was designed by the states to cover all of their concerns, and it's the primary vehicle that states today use when deploying assistance. But is it absolutely necessary to deploy under EMAC? No.
Next question, are there standards in place for the level of training and experience a PIO must have to be deployed, such as an advanced PIO course or a basic PIO course?
That's a good question. In my experience, I would say no. However, it raises an interest. This has to do mostly with typing. If the PIO community wants to type resources, in other words, PIOs or deputies or support staff, that's what typing is all about. In typing, you can identify what minimum requirements should be established for a PIO and other staff that might support that function.
Our next question, can you deploy on multiple rotations with EMAC on a major incident? Meaning, can you rotate home and then return for another rotation? Is this done?
That is done. And again, that's up to the state requesting the assistance and the state providing. Whatever the two states agree to is possible. However, for safety purposes, it is advisable, as the question was asked, it did cover this. If you rotate out, you do need, after a 2-week deployment under conditions that are typically faced, you do need some downtime. So, it's advised that you have at least 2 weeks, a week to 2 weeks off before you rotate back in.
Okay, great. That's all the questions that we have. I just want to remind everyone that there is a state-designated contact or EMAC coordinator within your state. So feel free to contact them or us about any other questions you might have concerning EMAC. And thank you again for joining us today. We appreciate your interest in EMAC and hope that you get to deploy out on an EMAC mission. The slides from today, along with the full listing of the EMAC articles, will be sent along to you as a reference. If you need more information about EMAC, feel free to contact us. Thank you very much.